Light exploded through the curved glass corridor of Horizon Station. Captain James Morgan ran with a determination he hadn't felt since his days as a combat medic in the Gulf War. Beside him, Queen Alara's translucent body pulsed with colors that shouldn't have been possible, waves of crimson and gold that turned her crystalline form into something like a living sunset. Red alerts blared through the station's speakers. On every monitor, they passed the same horrifying image, the once brilliant bioluminescent oceans of Azuria turning black, dying by the minute. "Stop!" the commanding voice echoed through the corridor. Senator Zurith stood before them, his crystalline body emitting only the steady, controlled blue glow that all Luminara were supposed to maintain. 6 guards flanked him, their bodies equally disciplined in their luminescence. "You are no longer our queen," Zorith's voice cut through the alarm sirens. "The human has corrupted you." James felt Alara's body temperature rise beside him, her light intensifying until he had to shield his eyes. "I am not corrupted," she said, her voice like wind through crystal. "I am evolving, and I will save our people." The light from her body grew blindingly bright. 3 months earlier, the ocean sample glowed faintly in the specimen tank, its bioluminescence dimming with each passing hour. James Morgan leaned closer, his weathered hands steady despite their slight tremor. A souvenir from Desert Storm, along with the scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline. "Come on, little one," he whispered to the dying organism. "I've seen worse cases make it." Around him, Horizon Station's hydrolab hummed with activity as younger scientists hurried between their stations, most deliberately avoiding his section of the lab. At 64, James was at least 20 years older than any other human on the station. The floating research facility represented humanity's grandest achievement, 12 different species working together to study the universe. Yet he often felt like its most overlooked component. His official title was Xenobiological Medical Consultant, but the younger researchers had taken to calling him the orderly behind his back. No advanced degrees in xenobiology, just 30 years of military medical experience and a stubborn refusal to let anything die if he could help it. The organism in the tank pulsed once, then dimmed further. James adjusted the salinity levels and added a compound of his own design, one the station's chief medical officer, Dr. Catherine Walker, had dismissed as field medicine, not science. The mixture clouded the water momentarily before clearing. "I've patched up boys bleeding out in the sand with less to work with than this," he murmured. "You've got everything you need right here." His mind flashed back to the Iraqi desert, the smell of blood and gunpowder, a young private whose femoral artery had been severed by shrapnel. Everyone said the boy wouldn't make it to evac. James had thought otherwise. The organism in the tank suddenly flared with light, weak but steady. The pattern of its bioluminescence changed, pulsing in a rhythm that almost resembled a heartbeat. "That's it," James smiled, making a note on his datapad. "Find your rhythm." Behind him, the lab door hissed open. Dr. Sato, the station's youngest xenobiologist, glanced at James's work and shook his head. "You're wasting your time, Morgan. That species can't survive outside its symbiotic network. The research team already documented its death cycle." James didn't look up from his work. "With respect, doctor, I've found that most living things fight like hell to stay alive if you give them the right support." Sato's why was audible. "Director Harrison wants the final reports on the Azurian samples by morning. Don't include your experiments." After Sato left, James continued his work well into the night shift. The organism had stabilized its light, now pulsing in a steady rhythm. The lab had emptied except for him, the only sound the gentle bubbling of the specimen tanks and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. He was so focused on adjusting the nutrient balance that he didn't notice the new presence in the lab until a soft glow reflected off his datapad. James looked up. She stood 15 feet away, her translucent body illuminated from within by a light that reminded him of moonlight through crystal. What caught his attention most was her hair. Long, intricate braids of deep red energy that seemed almost impossible on her glass-like form, cascading down to her waist. But it was her legs that defied understanding. They weren't solid limbs, but flowing strands of bioluminescent material that moved like silk underwater, carrying her with impossible grace across the lab floor. Each strand pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that almost hypnotized him. The Luminara. James had seen them around the station, of course, but rarely this close. They kept to themselves, logical and efficient in their research, minimal in their interaction with other species. "The organism responds to your compound," she said, her voice like wind chimes in still air. Fascinating. James straightened, suddenly conscious of his rumpled uniform and the 3-day stubble on his chin. Just a modified electrolyte solution with a calcium base, nothing fancy. She moved closer, her movement so fluid it seemed she was floating rather than walking. The other researchers declared it non-viable 4 hours ago. Well, nobody told the organism it was supposed to die. James smiled slightly, watching as she studied his work with an intensity that made his heart rate increase. You are not one of the primary research teams, she observed. Captain James Morgan, xenobiological medical consultant. He didn't extend his hand, knowing Luminara avoided physical contact with other species. Former combat medic. Combat. You healed damage from intentional harm. Her head tilted slightly. Inefficient. James couldn't help but chuckle. Can't argue with that assessment. She continued studying the organism, her crystalline fingers hovering just above the tank. The organism's light seemed to pulse stronger in response to her proximity. Your technique is unorthodox, she said. That's a diplomatic way of saying no one else would try it. She turned to face him fully, and James found himself looking into eyes that were like pools of light within her transparent face. It is effective nonetheless. The organism should not have survived separation from its network. Yet it lives. James watched as she moved around the lab, examining his other specimens. Her leg strands created ripples in the air as she walked, patterns of light shifting with each step. Your legs, he said, before he could stop himself, they move like poetry, like music made visible. The lab fell completely silent. The Luminara went still, her inner light dimming so dramatically that for a moment James feared she might collapse. Then without warning, her entire body erupted in a cascade of colors, patterns swirling through her transparent form that he'd never seen in any Luminara before. Waves of gold crimson and colors he couldn't even name pulsed from her core to her extremities. James stepped back, alarmed. I'm sorry, did I say something wrong? Her light settled into a rapid pulsing rhythm. No one has ever described my physical form in such a manner. I didn't mean to offend. Offense is an emotional response. Luminara do not. She stopped, her light fluctuating. I should go. Before James could respond, she turned and left the lab, her leg strands trailing behind her like the tail of a comet. He stood there confused and concerned, wondering if he'd just caused a diplomatic incident by complimenting an alien's legs. The organism in the tank pulsed brightly, almost as if it were laughing at him. The next morning, Director Harrison summoned James to his office. The director was a tall man with the perfect posture of someone who'd spent his entire career making sure he was the most impressive person in any room. His office overlooked the vast curve of Azuria below the planet's bioluminescent oceans, casting a blue glow across his features. Captain Morgan, Harrison said without preamble, would you care to explain why the Luminara ambassador has inquired about an interaction you had with one of their researchers last night? James felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Sir, if I caused offense. Offense? Harrison looked puzzled. The Luminara don't take offense, Morgan. They're the most logical species we've encountered. They don't have emotional responses. Then I don't understand. The door opened and Dr. Catherine Walker entered. In her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident stride of someone accustomed to emergency situations, she was one of the few senior staff members who treated James with genuine respect. I've spoken with the Acrylian botanist who witnessed the encounter, she said, taking a seat. It seems our Captain Morgan made a comment about a Luminara's physical appearance that caused some sort of reaction. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. What kind of reaction? Catherine looked at James with an expression that mixed concern with fascination. According to the botanist, the Luminara's bioluminescence displayed patterns that have never been observed in their species before. I just said her legs moved like poetry, James explained, feeling ridiculous. Like music made visible. It was just an observation. Catherine and Harrison exchanged glances. What? James asked. What aren't you telling me? Catherine leaned forward. James the Luminara you spoke to wasn't just any researcher. That was Alara, Queen of the Luminara. James felt the blood drain from his face. Queen, yes, Harrison said gravely. The highest authority in their civilization visiting our station as part of a diplomatic research exchange. And you, he pointed at James, somehow triggered a physiological response in her that the Luminara ambassador called unprecedented. Is that bad? James asked carefully. Catherine's expression was unreadable. We don't know. The Luminara aren't like us, James. They're born from thought pools designed for purpose. Their forms serve functions. They don't have aesthetic appreciation. They don't have emotional responses. Until now, apparently, Harrison added dryly. Catherine continued, in 300 years of documented contact with their species, no one has ever reported seeing a Luminara display the kind of bioluminescent patterns that Queen Alara exhibited after your comment. James ran a hand through his gray-flecked hair. So I've potentially caused a diplomatic incident by complimenting an alien queen's legs. Or, Catherine said thoughtfully, you've made a scientific breakthrough in interspecies communication. We just don't know which yet. Harrison stood straightening his uniform. Until we understand what happened, Captain Morgan, you are to avoid further contact with Queen Alara. Is that clear? Crystal, sir. As James left the office, Catherine followed him into the corridor. When they were alone, she spoke in a hushed tone. There's something you should know, James. The Luminara, they're not just logical. They've engineered themselves to be that way. There are theories that they once had emotional responses, but selectively bred them out of their species, considering them inefficient. James frowned. Why are you telling me this? Catherine glanced around before continuing. Because whatever you triggered in Queen Alara might be something dormant in their species, something they've tried to eliminate, and that could be politically explosive. For 3 days, James saw no sign of Queen Alara. He went about his work trying to ignore the whispers that followed him through the station. Even the other species seemed to be watching him with new interest. The four-eyed Acrylian botanists stared openly whenever they passed in the corridors, and the normally aggressive Daxian engineers gave him a wider berth than usual. During his off hours, James accessed the station's database to learn more about the Luminara. Their civilization was one of the oldest in the known galaxy, built on principles of pure logic and function. Their society had no art, no music, no concept of beauty beyond efficient design. Their communication was precise, without metaphor or embellishment. Yet something about Queen Alara's reaction nagged at him. The cascade of colors through her transparent body hadn't seemed like malfunction. It had looked like joy, or something very close to it. On the fourth night after their encounter, James couldn't sleep. He made his way to Observation Deck 7, the smallest viewing area on Horizon, rarely used because it faced away from Azuria toward open space. He was surprised to find it wasn't empty. Queen Alara stood at the window, her body casting colored reflections on the glass. Her red energy braids seemed darker, somehow absorbing light instead of reflecting it. I knew you would come, she said without turning. James stopped at the entrance, remembering Harrison's orders. I should go. Please don't. Now she turned, and James saw something new in her transparent face. Uncertainty. I have been observing you, James Morgan. For 3 days I have watched you work, eat, sleep. That's concerning. The other humans find this behavior problematic. They use words like stalking and creepy. Despite everything, James smiled. Are you trying to make a joke? Yes. Was it effective? Actually, it was pretty good. Her glow warmed slightly. I have been studying human humor. Also, human poetry, human music, human everything. She moved closer, her leg strands creating hypnotic patterns. Do you know what I discovered? James shook his head. That humans are terribly inefficient. You spend enormous amounts of energy on things that serve no survival function. You create art no one will see. You sing songs that accomplish nothing. You fall in love with people who will die in less than a century. Her voice grew softer. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever encountered. James's heart hammered in his chest. Alara, let me finish. She held up one delicate hand. When you commented on my legs, something happened inside me. A new thought pattern emerged. Not logical, not functional, just feeling. I have been trying to understand it, to categorize it, to make it fit into Luminaran frameworks, but it refuses. It simply exists. She was close enough now that James could see the tiny lights moving through her body like stars in a personal galaxy. I watched you eat your breakfast yesterday, Alara continued. You made a face at the synthetic eggs. A small expression barely noticeable, but I found it. She paused, searching for the word charming. Charming, James repeated softly. Yes, charming. And when you laugh at Dr. Walker's inappropriate jokes, your eyes create small lines at the corners. I have calculated that these lines serve no purpose except to indicate joy. Yet I find myself wanting to cause them, to make you laugh, to see those purposeless lines appear. That's called liking someone, James said, his voice rough. No. Ilara's whole body pulsed once brightly. I have researched this extensively. What I am experiencing is called attraction, possibly infatuation. There is a 47% chance it might be the early stages of love, though I need more data to confirm. James couldn't help it. He laughed, those lines appearing at his eyes. Alara's body blazed with light so beautiful it hurt to look at directly. "There," she said, her voice filled with something that sounded suspiciously like wonder. "That is why I have been avoiding you, James Morgan. Because every time I see you, I become less luminaire and more something else. Something new." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, her hand touched his chest right over his heart. "Your heart beats at 72 rhythms per minute at rest," she said. "Right now it beats at 108 because of me." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "A human body altering its function because of my presence. How is that not the most intimate thing in the universe?" James covered her hand with his. Through her transparent skin, he could see light pulsing in patterns that matched his own heartbeat. "Elara, I need to tell you something. That you find me attractive as well, I know. Your pupils dilate when you see me. Your breathing changes. You unconsciously lean toward me in shared spaces. Humans are very obvious." "You just made another joke." "I am learning." Her luminescence softened to something warm and gentle. "James, will you teach me more about feelings, about beauty, about all the inefficient, purposeless things that make humans human?" "Yes," he said, "but I should warn you, feelings can be messy, complicated, sometimes painful." "I know," Alara said. "I have been feeling them for 3 days. And despite the discomfort, despite the confusion, I do not wish to stop." They stood together in the observation deck, watching stars that were already dead, their light traveling across time itself to reach this moment. And somewhere in the distance, James thought he heard music, though it might have just been the sound of two hearts learning to beat in harmony. The message appeared on James's data pad at 2200 hours. "Meet me at observation deck 7, 2300 hours. Come alone." James read it 17 times, analyzing every word like it contained the secrets of the universe. Come alone could mean anything. Maybe she wanted privacy for a serious conversation. Maybe she was going to tell him this whole thing was a mistake. Maybe, "Stop overthinking and just go," Catherine said, appearing behind him in the research lab. "And for the love of all, that's wholly comb your hair first." At 22:55 hours, James stood outside observation deck 7 trying to calm his racing heart. He'd changed shirts 3 times. He'd practiced what to say. He'd even looked up more information about Luminaran customs, though most of it basically said, "They don't do romance, they don't understand it, don't even try." Great. The door slid open before he could knock. Alara stood in the center of the room and James forgot how to breathe. She had changed, not physically. Luminarans couldn't really change their bodies, but her bioluminescence had transformed into something he'd never seen before. Patterns of light moved through her transparent form like living paintings, spirals and waves and shapes that seemed to tell stories without words. Her red energy braids had been woven with some kind of luminescent thread that sparkled like captured starlight. "You came," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. "I was 63% certain you would, but there was a 37% chance you might find this too forward." "Forward is good," James managed. "Forward is great. You look, I don't even have words." "That is acceptable. I have discovered that the best things often exist beyond language." She gestured to the window where Azuria now dominated the view, its oceans glowing with their own bioluminescent life. "I have been practicing something," she said. "It may not work. Luminaran bodies are not designed for what I am attempting." "What are you attempting?" Instead of answering, Alara closed her eyes, or at least the light in her eye spaces dimmed. Then slowly the patterns in her body began to change. They condensed, focused, and suddenly James realized what he was seeing. Images, memories. In her torso, he saw himself in the hydrolab laughing at something. In her arms, he saw his own face concentrated on his work. And in the area near her heart, if Luminarans had hearts, he saw that moment 3 days ago when he'd called her beautiful, rendered in light and color and feeling. "This is how I see you," Alara whispered. "Not with data, not with logic, with something else. Something you taught me." James stepped closer. "That's incredible. It is inefficient. It serves no purpose. It makes me vulnerable." Her eyes opened, glowing brighter. "I love it." They stood inches apart now. James could feel the warmth of her light on his skin. "I have been researching human courtship rituals," Alora said. "They are confusing. Some cultures exchange gifts, others perform dances. Some engage in elaborate verbal negotiations. Humans cannot even agree among themselves what romance should look like." "That's because romance is different for everyone," James said. It's not about following rules. It's about two people figuring out what works for them. Then I would like to figure out what works for us. She lifted one hand slowly. May I touch you? Luminarians do not typically engage in physical contact except for practical purposes, but I find myself wanting to touch you for entirely impractical reasons. Yes, James said, his voice rough. Her hand, delicate and transparent and glowing, touched his cheek. Her fingers were warm, almost vibrating with light. James reached up and covered her hand with his own, marveling at the way he could see their skin touching from both sides through her transparency. Your face is very different from mine, Alara observed. Solid opaque. No one can see inside you. How do humans know what each other are feeling? We learn to read the signs, the way someone looks at you, the way they lean in when you talk, the way they show up when you ask them to meet you late at night. I am not good at subtlety yet, Alara admitted. So I will simply tell you I think about you constantly. When I process data, you are there. When I observe phenomena, I wonder what you would think of them. When I attempt to sleep, which Luminarians only do occasionally, I dream of showing you things, teaching you things, learning things together. That's called falling for someone, James said softly. Then I am falling. Her other hand rose to his chest again, seeking his heartbeat. Is it supposed to feel like losing control? Yes. Is it supposed to feel frightening and wonderful simultaneously? Absolutely. Then I am doing it correctly. She smiled, or at least her light formed patterns that conveyed joy. James, I want to understand more about how humans express affection, about how they show someone they care. I have read about kissing, but the descriptions are very technical and do not capture why humans find it meaningful. James's heart thundered so loud he was sure she could hear it. Would you like me to show you? He asked. Yes, she breathed. But I must warn you, Luminarian bodies respond to strong emotions with light. I do not know what will happen if we... He kissed her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Alara's entire body exploded with light. Not just patterns, but waves of pure brilliance that filled the entire observation deck. Colors James didn't have names for cascaded through her form. Her leg strands lifted off the ground, spreading in a corona of bioluminescent beauty. When they broke apart, Alara was glowing so brightly that James had to shield his eyes. That, she said, her voice full of wonder, was inefficient. Did you like it? I never want to be efficient again. They kissed again, softer this time, and Alara's light settled into a warm, pulsing rhythm that matched James's heartbeat. Outside the window, Azuria rotated slowly, its oceans full of light. Inside, two beings from different worlds discovered that beauty wasn't just something you saw. It was something you felt shared and created together. James, Alara whispered against his lips, I think I understand now what you meant about my legs. You were not commenting on their function. You were seeing the life within them, the movement, the existence, the being. Yes, he said simply. Then let me tell you something. Her hands framed his face, her light warm and gentle. Your eyes are beautiful, not because they see, but because of the way they look at me like I am something worth seeing. They stayed in the observation deck until the station's night cycle ended, learning the language of each other's bodies, teaching and being taught, falling into something neither species had quite experienced before. And somewhere in the ship's database, a Luminaran cultural record was quietly updated, first recorded case of emotional expression in Luminaran species due to human contact. Status ongoing study recommended. Status beautiful. The problem started in the commissary 3 weeks later. James was eating breakfast, actual eggs today, not synthetic, when he noticed the 3 Luminarans at the corner table. They were watching him with that unsettling stillness their species maintained when conducting serious observation. Their body lights were dim-controlled, perfectly regulated. Everything Alara's wasn't anymore. Catherine slid into the seat across from him. Don't look now, but you've got admirers. And by admirers, you mean the Luminaran equivalent of concerned parents. They've been following me for 2 days, James muttered. Yesterday, one of them asked to observe my daily patterns. I'm pretty sure I'm being investigated. Can you blame them? You corrupted one of their own. Catherine grinned. You taught a logical being to feel. You're like the serpent in the garden, except instead of an apple, you offered compliments and kissing. That's not helpful. It's a little helpful. The truth was, James had noticed the change in atmosphere. The Luminarans aboard Horizon, there were 7 of them, had become noticeably colder toward him. They didn't speak to him unless necessary. They rerouted their paths to avoid him in corridors. And Alara was being pressured to choose. She told him about it last night in his quarters, her body flickering with frustrated light as she paced. They say I am losing my clarity, that emotions are making me inefficient, that I should undergo a thought cleansing to restore proper function. Can they force you? James had asked, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. No, but they can make me choose between my people. She looked at him, her light pulsing rapidly. And this, us, whatever we are now. Watching the Luminarans watch him, James felt anger rising. He'd done nothing wrong. Alara had done nothing wrong. They had just found something beautiful together. His data pad buzzed. Message from Alara Lab 3 now. Please hurry. James ran. He found her in the xenobiology lab, surrounded by 3 older Luminarans, whose bodies barely glowed at all. The mark of the most disciplined, most traditional members of their species. Alara's light was going haywire, flashing between bright and dim like a distress signal. Lieutenant Morgan, said the largest Luminaran, whose name James remembered as Zorith, you have been conducting an unauthorized experiment on one of our people. I haven't been conducting anything. You have introduced emotional contamination into a Luminaran consciousness. This is unprecedented, dangerous, potentially irreversible. It's not contamination, James said sharply. It's growth, it's change, It is corruption, Zorith interrupted. Alara was one of our finest researchers. Her thoughts were pure, her logic uncompromised. Now look at her. She fluctuates. She hesitates. She wastes energy on purposeless light displays. Those displays are called emotions. James moved to stand beside Alara. And they're not purposeless. They're what make life worth living. For humans, perhaps, not for Luminarans. Then let Alara decide for herself. All eyes turned to her. Alara's light had stabilized into a deep, steady glow that James had learned meant she was thinking intensely. I have been Luminaran for 23 of your Earth years, she said quietly. I have processed data, conducted research, served my purpose with perfect efficiency, and I was content. But I was never happy. I did not even know happiness was possible until James showed me. Happiness is a chemical reaction, Zorith said dismissively. Nothing more. So is everything else. Alara's light flared. Thoughts are electrical impulses. Logic is neural pathways. We are all just chemical reactions, Zorith. The question is, which reactions do we choose to value? We value clarity, purpose, function. I value beauty, connection, love. She took James's hand, and through her transparent skin, he could see their fingers interlacing. I choose to value this. The silence in the lab was absolute. Finally, Zorith spoke. If you continue this path, you will no longer be truly Luminaran. You understand this? Then perhaps, Alara said softly, I will be something new, something better, something that is both Luminaran and more than Luminaran. Is that not the purpose of evolution? To become something we were not before. Before anyone could answer, alarms blared throughout the station. Emergency protocols activated. The lights shifted to red. All personnel to stations, came the automated announcement. Gravitational anomaly detected. Repeat gravitational anomaly. The ship lurched violently. James grabbed a table to steady himself. The Luminarans barely moved their leg strands, automatically compensating for the shift in gravity. That came from Azuria. Zorith said, his light suddenly shifting to urgent patterns. Something is wrong with the planet. They rushed to the observation deck, all of them together now. Crisis overriding controversy. What they saw made James's blood run cold. Azuria's oceans, usually bioluminescent and beautiful, were going dark. Massive patches of blackness spread across the surface like an infection, killing the light beneath the waves. The deep-sea organisms, Alara breathed. They're dying, all of them simultaneously. How is that possible? I don't know, James said, but if they die... She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, James saw fear in her eyes. James, those organisms produce 90% of this planet's oxygen. If they die, every Luminaran colony on the surface dies with them. 30 million of my people. The gravity of the situation crashed over everyone in the room. The personal drama of moments ago suddenly seemed infinitely small. We have to do something, James said. The research teams have been studying this for months, Zorith said grimly. No one has found a solution. The organisms are dying from some kind of cascade failure we don't understand. Then we need to understand it faster. James turned to Alara. You said emotions made you less efficient, but what if they made you more creative? What if the answer isn't pure logic but something else? That's absurd, Zorith said. Is it? James challenged. How many Luminarans have tried to solve this problem with logic alone? All of them. And how many have succeeded? None. Maybe it's time to try something inefficient, something illogical, something human. Alara's light began to pulse rapidly, her thinking pattern. Then suddenly she gasped. The organisms die when they stop communicating, she said rapidly. They're colony-based networked through bioluminescent signals. If the network breaks down, they can't coordinate their oxygen production. They literally forget how to survive. We know this, Zorith said impatiently, but we've been trying to fix the network with technical solutions, amplifier signal boosters, logic-based communication protocols. Ilara's whole body was glowing now. What if that's wrong? What if they don't need stronger signals? What if they need different signals? I don't understand, James said. Ilara turned to him, her eyes blazing with light. James, when you compliment me, your words aren't logical. They don't convey useful data, but they make me feel connected to you, bonded, alive. What if that's what the organisms need? Not better communication, but emotional communication. Organisms don't have emotions, Zorith said flatly. Luminarans aren't supposed to either, Ilara shot back. But here I am feeling thriving, more alive than I've ever been. What if we've been denying these organisms and ourselves the very thing that makes life sustainable? She grabbed James's hand and pulled him toward the door. I need to test something. James, I need you to teach me everything you know about emotional communication. Every human trick for making someone feel connected, valued, loved. We're going to try teaching the organisms to feel. That's insane, Zorith called after them. Good, Ilara shouted back. Sanity hasn't been working. As they ran through the quarters together, James realized that the Luminaran elders weren't following to stop them. They were following to help. Because sometimes when logic fails, you need someone crazy enough to try emotion instead. And sometimes the most illogical thing, love between two impossible people, becomes the answer to everything. 72 hours. That's how long they had before the cascade failure became irreversible. The observation lab had been transformed into something between a research center and a creative studio. Ilara stood at the center coordinating teams of Luminaran and human scientists who were working together with a common purpose, not just to study, but to save. James watched her direct the controlled chaos with a mixture of logic and intuition that shouldn't have been possible. Her body glowed in patterns he'd never seen before, somehow conveying both data and emotion simultaneously. She'd become something new. Not fully Luminaran, not human, but a bridge between both. The theory is sound, Catherine said, reviewing their work. If the organism's bioluminescent network is breaking down because they've lost emotional coherence, essentially they've forgotten why they should work together, then reintroducing emotional signaling might restore function. But teaching organisms to feel, James shook his head. That's not science, that's philosophy. Maybe poetry. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Ilara said, joining them. They'd spent 3 days studying human emotional communication and translating it into bioluminescent patterns. Laughter became rapid light pulses. Affection became warm, steady glows. Joy became cascading waves of brightness. And love became a rhythm, a heartbeat made visible. Ilara had taken all of it and created something entirely new, an emotional communication protocol that could theoretically be transmitted into Azuria's oceans, teaching the dying organisms to reconnect through feeling instead of mere function. Are we ready, Mom? Zorith asked. The senator had become their unlikely ally, his traditional Luminaran logic forced to admit that conventional methods had failed. If emotion was the answer, then emotion they would try. No, Ilara said honestly, but we're out of time. The transmission array had been modified to broadcast their emotional protocol directly into the ocean depths. It was an absurd plan, sending love letters to microscopic organisms hoping they would understand. The massive view screen displayed the spreading darkness across Azuria's oceans. Another 5% had gone dark in the last hour alone. At this rate, the planet's oxygen production would fall below sustainable levels within 2 days. A tremor ran through the station. The gravitational anomalies were increasing as more organisms died. The planet's delicate ecological balance was unraveling. James felt the weight of 30 million lives pressing down on him. We need to boost the signal, Ilara said, studying the readouts. Our transmission won't reach deep enough to affect the primary colonies. We've already maxed out the station's power allocation, one of the engineers reported. Any more and we risk overloading the core. James saw the frustration in Alara's eyes, or rather in the rapid pulsing of light around her eye structures. He'd learned to read her emotions through her luminescence, a language few humans had ever bothered to decode. "There has to be a way," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety radiating through her light patterns. The door to the observation lab hissed open. Director Harrison entered, followed by a delegation of luminarians James had never seen before. Their crystalline bodies glowed with the controlled blue light of the traditionalists, but with an intensity that marked them as authorities. "The Luminaran High Council has arrived," Harrison announced, his voice tight. James felt Alara stiffen beside him. Her light dimmed momentarily, fear he recognized. "Counselor Mavis," she acknowledged, her voice formal, in a way James had never heard before. The tallest of the new Luminarans moved forward, his crystalline form towering over both James and Alara. His leg strands barely moved when he walked, controlled to the point of seeming solid. "Queen Alara," Mavis said, his voice like ice over glass. "We received Senator Zorith's report of the situation and of your condition." James felt his jaw tighten. Condition, as if her newfound emotions were a disease. "I am functional counselor," Alara replied. "That remains to be determined." Mavis's gaze shifted to James, clinical and cold. "This is the human responsible." Before James could answer, Alara moved slightly in front of him, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the council. "Captain Morgan has helped me discover aspects of Luminaran potential that have been dormant for generations," she said. "This discovery may be the key to saving our people on Azuria." Mavis studied the workstations, the modified transmission array, the simulation models running on various screens. "You propose to communicate with the organisms using emotional signaling." "Yes," Alara said firmly. "Absurd. Emotional responses were bred out of our species 10,000 years ago because they were inefficient and dangerous. You propose to reintroduce them to our biological foundation." "The organisms are dying," James interjected. "Your conventional methods haven't worked." Mavis turned his cold gaze to James. "Humans, always so quick to embrace chaos when order fails them." "Sometimes chaos is exactly what's needed," Catherine said, stepping forward. "The organisms have evolved alongside your people for millennia. What if they've always needed the emotional component that your species abandoned? What if the network is failing precisely because it lacks what you call inefficient?" Mavis's light flickered briefly, the Luminaran equivalent of a scowl. "Dr. Walker, I have reviewed your research history. You have been studying Luminaran emotional capacity for 17 years, often without proper authorization." James glanced at Catherine in surprise. 17 years, she'd never mentioned the depth of her research. Catherine didn't flinch. "Because I recognized the potential that was being wasted. Your species chose a path of pure logic, but biology doesn't work that way. Even the most efficient systems need redundancy, need chaos, need feeling. This is precisely the kind of corrupting influence we feared when establishing contact with humans," another counselor said. "Corruption or evolution?" Alara challenged. "Look at what's happening, Counselor Mavis. Our homeworld is dying while we debate philosophy." James watched the confrontation with growing tension. Every minute lost in argument meant more darkness spreading across Azuria's oceans. "I have reviewed Senator Zorith's data," Mavis said finally. "It is concerning that our traditional methods have failed. However, your proposal threatens more than just these organisms. It threatens the very foundation of Luminaran society." "Only if it works," James said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to him. "If it fails," he continued, "then you've lost nothing except time. If it works, then yes, you might have to reconsider some of your assumptions about emotions and efficiency. But 30 million of your people will be alive while you do that reconsidering." Silence fell over the lab. James could see the various light patterns of the Luminarans shifting as they communicated in their own silent language. Finally, Mavis spoke. "You have 12 hours to demonstrate results. After that, we implement the Council's contingency plan." "What contingency plan?" Alara demanded. "Evacuation of essential personnel only. The rest," Mavis's light dimmed, "the rest will be statistical casualties." The council members departed, leaving a chill in the air despite the lab's regulated temperature. "Essential personnel," James repeated bitterly, "meaning council members, high-ranking officials, and those with valuable genetic traits. That's how they've always handled crises," Alara said, her voice hollow. "Logical triage." The team worked with renewed urgency. James noticed the younger Luminarans in their group seemed different now, their lights fluctuating in patterns similar to Alara's, though less pronounced. Exposure to her was affecting them, awakening something long dormant in their species. 4 hours later, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young Luminaran researcher named Talus approached their workstation, his light pulsing in irregular patterns that marked him as one of those affected by Alara's presence. "I've been analyzing the deep ocean scanning data," he said hesitantly. "There's something we missed. The darkness isn't spreading uniformly. There are small pockets where the organisms remain active." Alara leaned forward. "Show me." The display showed the darkening oceans of Azuria, but with Talus's enhanced imaging, tiny points of light became visible within the darkness, survivors somehow resisting the cascade failure. "What's different about these regions?" James asked. "They're all located near underwater thermal vents," Talus explained. "I thought it might be the heat, but the temperature variation is minimal. It's something else." "The vibration," Catherine said suddenly. "Thermal vents create microseismic activity. The organisms near the vents are receiving constant rhythmic stimulation." "Like a heartbeat," James realized. Alara's light pulsed rapidly. "They're not just responding to chemical or light signals. They're responding to rhythm, to feeling." James remembered how the organism in his lab had stabilized when its bioluminescent patterns synchronized with a heartbeat-like rhythm. Not just any communication would work. It needed to have the pulse of life, the inefficient, beautiful rhythm of existence. "We need to recalibrate the transmission," Alara said, already moving to the array controls. "Not just emotional content, but emotional rhythm." They worked frantically, adjusting the protocol to include the patterns of James's heartbeat, Alara's light fluctuations, and the subtle vibrations of the thermal vents. The transmission would carry not just information, but feeling, the tactile sensation of connection. As they worked, James noticed more Luminarans joining their team voluntarily. Word had spread throughout the station about their efforts, and curiosity had overcome fear. Even some of the older Luminarans were watching with what might have been interest. "You're causing a revolution," Catherine whispered to James during a rare break. "Whether this works or not, you've shown them something they thought impossible." "Alara is the revolutionary," James replied. "I just appreciated her legs." Catherine smiled. "Sometimes the greatest changes come from the simplest acts of recognition." The modified transmission was ready with barely an hour to spare before the council's deadline. The team gathered in the observation lab, tension visible in human postures and Luminaran light patterns alike. "Even with the modifications, we don't have enough power to reach the deepest ocean trenches," the chief engineer reported. "That's where the primary organism colonies are located." "We need a signal booster," Zorth said. "Something to amplify and distribute the transmission once it reaches the ocean." "The Luminaran research vessel," Alara suggested. "It has deep water probes designed for direct contact with the organism networks." "The council would never approve their use for this purpose," Zorth warned. "Then we don't ask them." Alara's light flared with determination. "As queen, I still command the research fleet, at least for now." James watched her transform before his eyes, from scientist to sovereign. Her light stabilized into a pattern that combined authority with the emotional depth she'd developed. It was mesmerizing. "We have one shot at this," she addressed the team. "The probes will disperse throughout the deep trenches, broadcasting our protocol directly to the primary colonies. If this works, we should see results within hours." "And if it doesn't," someone asked, "then the council implements their evacuation plan, and millions die." Her voice was steady, but James could see the fear in her light patterns. The transmission sequence was prepared. The research vessel deployed its probes into Azuria's darkening oceans. All they could do now was wait and watch. "Captain Morgan," a voice called from behind him. James turned to find Counselor Mavis standing at the entrance to the lab. The Luminaran's light was perfectly controlled, betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Walk with me," Mavis said. It wasn't a request. James glanced at Alara, who nodded slightly. He followed Mavis into the corridor. They walked in silence for a moment, the counselor's leg strands making almost no sound against the floor. "You served in a war on your planet," Mavis said finally. "Yes, the Gulf War. I was a combat medic." "You have seen death, then, on a scale most humans never experience." James remembered the desert, the blood, the screams. "Yes, but nothing like what may happen on Azuria. 30 million lives. Can you comprehend that, Captain Morgan?" "No one can comprehend numbers that large," James admitted. "That's why I focus on saving one life at a time." They reached a viewport. Azuria loomed below, beautiful despite the spreading darkness. 10,000 years ago, Luminarans were like humans," Mavis said, surprising James with his candor. "Emotional, unpredictable, violent. We nearly destroyed ourselves in wars fueled by passion and irrationality. Our species made a choice to evolve beyond emotion, to embrace pure logic and function. And has it made you happy? James asked. Mavis's light flickered briefly. Happiness is irrelevant to survival. Is it? Then why are your people dying now? Maybe survival requires more than just function. Maybe it requires something to survive for. Mavis studied James with those luminous alien eyes. You love her, don't you, our queen? The question caught James off guard. Yes. A human and a Luminaran, impossible. And yet here we are. Indeed. Mavis turned back to the viewport. You should know, Captain, that regardless of the outcome today, the Council will not allow this evolution to continue. Queen Alara will be required to undergo cleansing, or she will be removed from her position. James felt cold anger rising in his chest. You'd force her to give up who she's becoming, to go back to being something less than she could be. We would restore her to what she was meant to be. And who decided what she was meant to be? You, some ancestors 10,000 years ago. James stepped closer to the Luminaran. Life evolves, counselor. That's what makes it life. Try to stop it, and you get exactly what's happening down there. Death. Mavis's light remained steady, controlled. The Council's decision is final. Then your Council may find themselves leading a revolution rather than preventing one, James warned. Look around you. The younger Luminarans are already changing. They've seen what Alara has become. You can't put that light back in the bottle. Before Mavis could respond, the station's communication system activated. Captain Morgan to Observation Lab immediately. Repeat, Captain Morgan to Observation Lab. James recognized Catherine's voice. Urgent but not panicked. Something was happening. He left Mavis without another word, hurrying back to the lab. When he entered, all eyes turned to him. What is it? He asked. Alara pointed to the main view screen. Look. The image showed a deep ocean trench, one of the primary organism colony sites. For a moment, James saw nothing unusual. Just darkness. Then at the edge of the gloom, a tiny point of light appeared. Then another, and another. It's working, Catherine whispered. The points of light multiplied, spreading through the darkness like stars appearing in an evening sky. The organisms were responding to the emotional protocol, their bioluminescence reactivating. They're reconnecting, Alara said, her voice filled with wonder. Not just communicating, feeling each other's presence. The lab erupted in excitement, humans cheering, Luminarans pulsing with uncharacteristically bright patterns. James found himself standing next to Alara, watching as life rekindled in the depths of an alien ocean. You did it, he told her. We did it. She corrected, her hand finding his. Logic and emotion working together. The celebration was short-lived. The lab doors opened, and the entire Luminaran High Council entered, followed by Director Harrison. The situation appears to be stabilizing, Mavis acknowledged. The organism colonies are reactivating. Yes, Alara said. The emotional protocol is working. The organisms are reconnecting through feeling, not just function. A temporary solution, another counselor stated. Once the crisis has passed, we will implement permanent technical measures. Technical measures won't work, Catherine argued. You saw the data. The organisms need emotional connection to maintain their network. Without it, they'll just fail again. Then we will engineer a simulation of emotional signaling, Mavis said. A logical approximation that produces the same effect without the inefficiency. James saw Alara's light dim with frustration. You still don't understand, she said. You can't simulate feeling. It either exists or it doesn't. This discussion is for the Council to resolve, Mavis stated. In private, Queen Alara, your presence is required for deliberation. The implication was clear. The humans were being dismissed. The Council would decide the fate of the planet and of Alara without their input. No, Alara said. The simple words sent ripples through the Council members' light patterns. These humans helped save our homeworld, she continued. They've proven that our path of pure logic has limitations. They deserve to be part of this conversation. This is a Luminaran matter, Mavis insisted. Is it? Alara challenged. What happens on Azuria affects everyone on this station. The organisms we just saved help maintain the planet's atmosphere, which keeps this station in stable orbit. Their fate is linked to ours, just as ours is linked to the humans. A younger counselor stepped forward. Perhaps Queen Alara is right. This discovery transcends our traditional boundaries. It may require a new approach. James recognized the subtle changes in the counselor's light patterns, the same changes he'd seen in the younger Luminarans working with Alara. Her influence was spreading even to the council. Mavis noticed it too. His perfectly controlled light faltered momentarily. This discussion will continue in the council chamber. Queen Alara, you will accompany us. The others may observe. It was a concession, however small. James caught Alara's eye as she prepared to leave with the council. Her light pulsed in a pattern he recognized, determination mixed with something like hope. As they filed out, Catherine moved to James's side. "This isn't over," she murmured. "The council won't give up control easily." "No," James agreed, "but they're facing something they've never encountered before." "What's that?" "Change." James watched Alara's glowing form disappear down the corridor. Real unstoppable change. The council chamber was austere compared to the rest of the station. Minimal decoration, functional lighting arranged in a perfect circle, with the Queen's position slightly elevated at one end. The humans and Senator Zorith were permitted to stand at the periphery while the council members took their positions around the central space. Alara moved to her place with a grace that made even her formal role seem like a dance. Her light had settled into a pattern that combined royal authority with her new emotional depth. Regal yet alive in a way none of the council members were. "The immediate crisis appears to be resolving," Mavis began. "The organism colonies are re-establishing their networks. Oxygen production has stabilized. For this, we acknowledge the contribution of the human researchers." The acknowledgement was clinical, devoid of actual gratitude. "However," he continued, "the method used raises profound concerns for our society. The introduction of emotional signaling, while effective in this instance, represents a fundamental threat to Luminaran stability." "A threat or an opportunity?" Alara challenged. "For 10,000 years, we've pursued efficiency at the cost of experience. We've valued function over feeling. And where has it led us to stagnation?" "Stability is not stagnation," another counselor argued. "Our civilization has advanced tremendously under logical guidance." "Technologically, yes," Alara conceded. "But biologically, culturally, we haven't evolved. We've been frozen in time, unable to adapt to new experiences." James watched the debate with fascination. The Luminarans communicated on multiple levels, verbal statements accompanied by complex light patterns that added layers of meaning humans couldn't fully comprehend. "What Queen Alara has experienced is not evolution," Mavis stated. "It is regression to a primitive state our ancestors deliberately abandoned." "Is it primitive to feel connected to others?" Alara asked. "Is it primitive to find beauty in existence, to value life for more than its function? Such thinking leads to irrationality, to conflict, to the very wars that nearly destroyed us," an elderly counselor warned. "Only if we abandon logic entirely," Alara countered. "I haven't lost my ability to reason. I've gained the ability to feel. Both together are stronger than either alone." The younger counselor, who had spoken earlier, moved slightly forward. "I admit I find Queen Alara's argument compelling. Our historical records show that our greatest advancements came not during periods of pure logic, but during transitions when creative thinking was still valued." Murmurs rippled through the council, both verbal and luminous. "You've been affected," Mavis accused the younger counselor. "Proximity to the Queen's condition has compromised your clarity." "I prefer to think it has enhanced my perspective," the younger counselor replied. James felt a surge of hope. The cracks in the Luminaran facade of perfect logic were spreading. Suddenly, the station shuddered. Alarms blared momentarily before silencing. "Another gravitational anomaly," Director Harrison reported, checking his datapad. "But different from the others, it's stabilizing." The main view screen activated, showing a real-time view of Azuria's oceans. The darkness that had been spreading was now receding. Light was returning to the waters, but not the steady uniform glow they had displayed before. Instead, patterns were emerging. Waves, pulses, rhythms that moved across the surface like vast living paintings. "What are we seeing?" Mavis demanded. "The organism network," Alara said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not just recovering, it's evolving. The emotional signaling didn't just restore their function, it enhanced it. The patterns on the ocean's surface grew more complex, more beautiful." James was reminded of the patterns that moved through Alara's body when she experienced strong emotions: joy, wonder, love. "The organisms are communicating in new ways," Catherine observed. "More complex, more resilient. They're forming deeper connections." "This is unprecedented," Zorith said, his own light patterns showing the first hints of emotional response. "The network was supposed to return to its previous state. Instead, it's becoming something more." "Like Alara," James said quietly. All eyes turned to the Queen. Her light had synchronized with the patterns visible on the ocean's surface, a silent communion with the newly awakened life below. What have you done? Mavis asked, his voice barely audible. I haven't done anything, Alara replied. Life has done what it always does when given the chance. It has grown. It has evolved. It has found new ways to thrive. The chamber fell silent as they all watched the transformation spreading across Azuria. The bioluminescent patterns grew more intricate, covering more of the planet's surface. Sensors reported increased oxygen production, improved atmospheric stability. The planet is healing itself, Harrison said, reviewing the incoming data, not just recovering, actively improving its own condition. Because the organisms are no longer just functioning, Ilara explained. They're flourishing. They have something more to sustain them now. Connection, feeling, purpose beyond mere survival. The implications hung in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. The Luminaran path of pure logic had nearly led to planetary catastrophe. Emotion, messy, inefficient, beautiful emotion, had saved them. This changes nothing, Mavis said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. The Council's position remains. Queen Alara must undergo cleansing to restore proper function. Before anyone could respond, the chamber doors opened. A group of Luminarans entered. Younger ones, scientists and researchers who had worked alongside Alara during the crisis. Their lights pulsed with unmistakable emotion. We request to address the Council, their leader said. This session is closed, Mavis stated. As is customary, any group representing more than 10% of a station's Luminaran population may petition the Council during crisis deliberations, the young Luminaran recited. We constitute 30% of Horizon's Luminaran contingent. Mavis couldn't refute the ancient protocol. Speak then. The young Luminaran stepped forward. We have all experienced changes similar to Queen Alara's, though less pronounced. We have begun to feel, to appreciate beauty, to form connections beyond mere function, and we have found ourselves not weakened, but strengthened by the experience. Mass contamination, an older counselor muttered. Evolution, the young Luminaran countered. Natural, inevitable evolution. Perhaps what happened to Queen Alara was meant to happen. Not a corruption, but a rediscovery of something our species abandoned too quickly. Another of the young Luminarans joined the first. We've reviewed the historical archives. The decision to eliminate emotion from our species was not unanimous. There were dissenters who warned that we might lose something essential to our development. What if they were right? Mavis's light flickered with what might have been agitation. These are dangerous ideas. Ideas are only dangerous when they threaten power, Alara said, rising from her position, not when they offer growth. The chamber erupted in light and sound. Arguments, counter-arguments, patterns of agreement and dissent flashing through Luminaran forms. James watched it all, recognizing the moment for what it was, a tipping point in an ancient civilization's history. Alara moved through the chaos to stand beside him. I never intended this, she said softly. No one does, James replied. Change just happens, whether we're ready for it or not. Like falling in love with an alien. Exactly like that. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Through her transparent skin, he could see their pulse points aligned, beating in rhythm. The Council is losing control, she observed, watching the increasingly animated debate. They've never faced open questioning before. What happens now? James asked. Alara's light pulsed with determination. Now we build something new. Something that honors what we were, but embraces what we can become. Outside the viewport, Azuria continued its transformation, its oceans alive with patterns of light that had never existed before. The visual language of a world awakening to feeling for the first time in millennia. And in that moment, James understood that what had begun with a simple compliment about an alien queen's legs had become something more profound, a revolution of light and feeling that might just change the fate of two species forever. 3 weeks passed. The corridors of Horizon Station hummed with an energy that went beyond its mechanical systems. Change moved through the station like light through Alara's crystalline form, impossible to contain, transforming everything it touched. In Lab 7, James carefully monitored the latest samples from Azuria. The organisms continued their remarkable evolution, developing communication patterns of increasing complexity. Their bioluminescence now displayed structures that reminded him of neural networks of communities of civilizations in miniature. They're creating art, Ilara said, entering the lab. Her light moved in gentle waves, a sign of contentment James had come to recognize. Art, he looked up from the microscope. Look at the latest deep scan imagery. She activated the main display. The ocean floor of Azuria filled the screen. Where once there had been merely functional colonies of bioluminescent organisms, now there were vast patterns, spirals, concentric circles, intricate geometries that served no survival purpose, beauty for its own sake. They're mimicking the emotional patterns we sent them, James said, amazed, but creating their own variations. Not just mimicking, they're exploring. Alara's light brightened with excitement. They've discovered what my ancestors abandoned. That feeling itself is worth expressing. James studied the patterns with wonder. In just 3 weeks, these simple colonial organisms had developed forms of expression that had taken human civilization thousands of years to discover. The implications were staggering. The council is still in emergency session. Alara continued, her light dimming slightly. They've been deliberating continuously since the crisis. 3 weeks of logical debate. James raised an eyebrow. That seems inefficient. Alara's light pulsed in the pattern he recognized as laughter. Quite inefficient. They've reached an impasse. The traditionalists insist this is a dangerous aberration that must be contained. The progressives argue it's the natural next step in our evolution. And what does the Queen think? She moved closer, her leg strands creating their hypnotic patterns. The Queen thinks her people have been incomplete for 10,000 years, and that it took a human with kind eyes and a soldier's heart to help her see it. James felt the now familiar warmth that came whenever she was near. Over the past weeks, they developed a relationship unlike any in human or Luminaran history, bridging not just different species, but fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. The younger Luminarans have formed a new faction, Alara said. They call themselves the Illuminated. They've embraced emotional expression as a complement to logic, not its replacement. How many? Nearly 40% of our population on Horizon and growing. The movement has spread to the research vessels and now to Azuria itself. Her light pulsed with something like pride. They're creating music, James. Luminaran music after 10 millennia of silence. The lab door opened. Catherine entered, followed by Talus, the young Luminaran researcher, who had helped identify the rhythm patterns in the organisms. I thought I'd find you two together, Catherine said, smiling. The council has requested your presence, both of you. They've reached a decision. Alara's light flickered with apprehension. They claim to have, Talus said. His own light patterns had evolved over the weeks, showing subtle emotional variations that would have been unthinkable for a Luminaran before Alara's transformation. But the situation is complex. When isn't it? James muttered, saving his work on the organisms. The council chamber had changed. Where before it had been austere, now the walls displayed projections of Azuria's oceans, the ever-changing patterns of light created by the evolving organisms. James wasn't sure if this was meant as a reminder of their success or a warning of the changes they'd unleashed. The council members sat in their perfect circle, Mavis, at what James had come to think of as the logical pole of the group, with the younger, more progressive counselors arranged toward the opposite side. The divide was visible, not just in their positions, but in their light patterns. The traditionalists maintaining steady, controlled luminescence, the progressives allowing subtle variations that betrayed their emerging emotional capacity. Captain Morgan, Queen Alara. Mavis acknowledged them with the minimum courtesy required. The council has deliberated on the events of recent weeks and their implications for Luminaran society. James felt Alara's light pulse with tension beside him. He resisted the urge to take her hand in front of the council. After careful consideration of all factors, Mavis continued, we have reached a compromise position. Compromise. Alara's surprise was evident in both her voice and her light. Yes, Your Majesty, said Councillor Vela, one of the younger progressives. We recognize that what has happened cannot simply be undone. The emotional awakening has spread too far among our people to be reversed without significant social disruption. Therefore, Mavis continued, his light perfectly controlled. Despite what must have been frustration, the council proposes the establishment of a new colony, a separate environment where those Luminarans who wish to explore this evolution may do so without contaminating the broader population. James felt anger rising in his chest. Segregation, that's your solution. Containment, Mavis corrected. A controlled environment for a potentially destabilizing social experiment. Our existence is not an experiment, Counselor. Alara said, her voice firm, but not hostile. We are the natural progression of our species, reconnecting with aspects of ourselves that were prematurely abandoned. That remains to be determined, Mavis countered. What is undeniable is that you and those like you have deviated significantly from established Luminaran norms. The council has been generous in offering this compromise rather than mandating corrective procedures. James understood the threat beneath the words. The traditionalists would have preferred to force Alara and her followers to undergo cleansing, the erasure of their emotional capacity. And where would this colony be established? Ilara asked. The southern continent of Azuria, Vela answered. An appropriate symmetry, as it was your connection with the organisms there that triggered this change. James glanced at Alara. Her light patterns were complex, shifting through what he had learned to recognize as thoughtfulness, concern, hope, and determination. "And my position as queen," she asked finally. "You would remain queen of the Luminaran people," Mavis said, "but would be required to appoint a logical proxy to represent traditional interests in council deliberations while you adjust to your new state." Translation, they would strip her of actual power while allowing her to keep the title. James felt his jaw clench. "I see," Alara said. Her light stabilized into a pattern of calm resolve that James had come to admire. "And if I refuse these terms, then the council would be forced to declare you medically compromised and unfit to rule," Mavis stated, "for the stability of our civilization." The chamber fell silent. James watched the other counselors, noting the discomfort evident in the light patterns of the progressives. This compromise clearly didn't satisfy anyone fully. "I request time to consider this proposal," Alara said finally. "Of course," Mavis agreed. "You have 24 hours. As they left the chamber, James struggled to contain his outrage. "They're exiling you, punishing you for evolving." "They're afraid, James," Alara replied, her voice gentle. "Fear is an emotion they refuse to acknowledge, which makes it all the more powerful. They fear what they don't understand, what they can't control." "So what will you do except exile?" Her light pulsed with determination. "I will do what queens have always done when faced with impossible choices. I will find a third path." Back in her quarters, Alara called an emergency meeting of her closest allies, James, Catherine, Zorith, who had surprisingly joined their cause after witnessing the ocean's transformation, and representatives of the illuminated faction. The space filled with the glow of luminarans in various stages of emotional awakening, their light patterns creating a symphony of color and feeling that would have been unthinkable months ago. "The council's offer is both an insult and an opportunity," Ilara began. "They seek to contain us, to isolate what they see as a contagion. But in doing so, they give us freedom to build something new." "A segregated colony is still segregation," James argued. "They're creating a two-tier system, traditional luminarans with full rights and status, emotional luminarans treated as deviants." "Perhaps initially," Zorith said. His own light now showed subtle emotional patterns, though more restrained than the younger luminarans. "But consider the historical precedent. When colonies are established with new philosophical foundations, they often become the dominant culture over time." Catherine nodded. "Earth's history is full of examples. The American colonies began as a refuge for those seeking religious freedom from England. Within 2 centuries, they had become a world power that eclipsed their former ruler." "Exactly," Alara said. "We won't just be building a refuge. We'll be creating a model, a demonstration of what Luminaran society can become when logic and emotion work in harmony." A young Luminaran named Neris spoke up. "The southern continent has direct access to the most active organism networks. We could continue developing our emotional communication protocols in partnership with them. And the organisms themselves are evolving rapidly," James added, thinking of his recent observations. "They're developing expression creativity. There might be possibilities for symbiosis we haven't even imagined." Ilara's light brightened. "That's it, James. Not just a colony, a partnership. A new kind of civilization built on the integration of different forms of consciousness." The energy in the room shifted, hope replacing the initial outrage at the council's terms. "What about your position as queen?" Catherine asked gently. Ilara's light dimmed slightly. "I will have to accept the proxy arrangement, at least initially. It gives us time to establish ourselves without direct interference." "They're trying to diminish your authority," James said. "Authority comes in many forms," Alara replied. "The council can limit my official power, but they cannot control my influence. As the first Luminaran to embrace emotion in 10,000 years, I have become something of a symbol." Her light pulsed with wry humor. "They fear that more than any political power I might hold." The meeting continued long into the night, plans taking shape for what they began to call the Harmony Colony, a place where logic and emotion function and beauty would be valued equally. As the others filed out, James remained with Alara. "You're giving up a lot," he said once they were alone. Your position, your status. Am I? Her light pulsed warmly. I'm gaining a future I never imagined possible. A chance to help my people grow beyond the limitations they imposed on themselves millennia ago. She moved closer to him. And I'm gaining you. James felt his heart beat faster, as it always did when she was near. I'm just an aging combat medic who said the right thing at the right time. You're the man who taught a queen to feel, Alara countered, who showed an entire species what they had forgotten. Her hand touched his cheek. Never diminish that gift, James Morgan. The next day, Alara formally accepted the council's terms with a dignity that impressed even her opponents. The announcement was made throughout Horizon Station and transmitted to Azuria. A new colony would be established on the southern continent, where Luminarians wishing to explore the integration of emotion and logic could live and work together. What surprised everyone, perhaps even Alara herself, was the response. Within hours, nearly 60% of Luminarians on the station had registered to join the colony. Reports from Azuria indicated similar numbers there. The aberration the council had tried to contain had already become the majority position. Mavis and the Traditionalists were forced to modify their approach, recasting the arrangement as a social experiment, rather than exile. Plans were accelerated for the establishment of the colony, with the first settlers scheduled to depart within a week. James found himself appointed as the human liaison to the colony project, working closely with Alara and the Illuminated leadership to design a community that would accommodate both Luminaran and human visitors. The station buzzed with activity and anticipation. 5 days before the first transport was scheduled to depart for the southern continent, James was working late in the lab when Catherine found him. You need to see this, she said without preamble, activating the main display. The screen showed a massive Luminaran vessel entering orbit around Azuria, far larger than the research ships James had seen before. What am I looking at? The Luminaran capital ship, Eternal Logic, Catherine said grimly. It just arrived from their homeworld. The High Council of the entire Luminaran Confederation is aboard. James felt a chill. They've come to stop the colony. I don't know, but their arrival wasn't scheduled, and Alara wasn't notified in advance, which violates about a dozen protocols. The lab door opened, and Talus rushed in, his light pulsing with agitation. They've ordered Queen Alara to board the capital ship immediately. Alone. James straightened. Like hell she will. James, Catherine cautioned, this is Luminaran internal politics. If you interfere, this stopped being internal politics the moment they tried to exile her for something I helped cause. He was already heading for the door. Where is she now? In her quarters, Talus replied. The High Council gave her 1 hour to comply. James found Alara in her private chambers surrounded by representatives of the Illuminated faction. Her light was steady but intense, showing the calm determination he had come to admire. You can't go alone, he said without preamble. I must, she replied. I am still queen. I still have responsibilities to all my people, not just those who share my evolution. It's a trap, one of the younger Luminarans argued. The High Council has always been even more traditional than our local council. They've come to force you into cleansing. Possibly, Alara acknowledged, but refusing their summons would only confirm their narrative that emotion leads to disorder and rebellion. James moved closer to her, lowering his voice. Then I'm coming with you. No, James, they specifically ordered me to come alone. I'm not Luminaran. I don't take orders from your High Council. Her light pulsed with what might have been exasperation, affection, or both. This is exactly the kind of illogical emotional response they would expect from a human. Good, let me live up to their expectations. For a moment, they stared at each other. The human and the Luminaran queen both transformed by their unlikely connection. Finally, Alara's light shifted to the pattern James recognized as acceptance. Very well, but you will follow my lead, Captain Morgan. This is a diplomatic situation of the highest sensitivity. James nodded. Understood, Your Majesty. 90 minutes later, they stood in the docking bay of the Eternal Logic, surrounded by the most powerful Luminarans in the galaxy. The High Council members were immediately distinguishable from those James had met on Horizon. Their crystalline bodies even more controlled their light patterns, so steady they barely seemed alive. The High Chancellor, a Luminaran named Serenor, regarded James with what might have been disapproval, though his light betrayed nothing. Queen Alara, you were instructed to come alone. Captain Morgan is my personal physician, Alara replied smoothly. Given the recent changes in my physiology, I deemed his presence medically necessary. It wasn't technically a lie. James had indeed been monitoring the physiological aspects of her transformation. The High Chancellor's gaze lingered on James for a moment longer before returning to Alara. We have received disturbing reports from Counselor Maivas about developments on Horizon Station and Azuria. A faction calling themselves the Illuminated claims to have rediscovered emotional capacity. Not a faction, Chancellor, Ilara corrected, a natural evolution, and not just a claim, a demonstrable reality. Show me, Serenor commanded. Without hesitation, Ilara allowed her light to transform, displaying the full range of emotional patterns she had developed. Colors cascaded through her crystalline form in waves and pulses that no traditional Luminaran could or would create. A murmur ran through the High Council members, both vocal and luminous. This is a neurological aberration, one counselor stated, a malfunction that must be corrected. Is it, Alara challenged, or is it the re-emergence of capacities our ancestors possessed before the Great Logic Purge 10,000 years ago? She gestured to a display panel. With your permission, Chancellor. Serenor nodded once. Ilara activated the panel, bringing up images of the transformed oceans of Azuria, the vast, beautiful patterns created by organisms responding to emotional signaling. These life forms were dying, she explained. All our logical approaches failed to save them. It was only by reintroducing emotional communication that they were revived. Not just restored, but enhanced. Fascinating, said one of the younger counselors, earning sharp looks from the others. James watched the subtle shifts in the council members' light patterns. Despite their rigid control, some were showing interest, perhaps even curiosity. Chancellor, Ilara continued, I believe what has happened is not a malfunction, but an opportunity. For millennia, our species has pursued pure logic at the expense of other forms of intelligence. We've achieved remarkable technological progress, but at what cost? We've lost art, music, literature, the very experiences that give meaning to existence. Meaning is irrelevant to function, Serenor stated. Is it? James couldn't help interjecting. The organisms of Azuria would disagree. When they lost their emotional connection, they lost their will to live. Function without meaning led to death. All eyes turned to him. The High Chancellor's light dimmed slightly, the Luminaran equivalent of a frown. You are the human responsible for triggering this change in our queen. I complimented her legs, James said simply. Everything else was already within her, within all of you, waiting to be recognized. Alara took over smoothly. Chancellor, the local council has proposed a solution that I have accepted. Those of us experiencing this evolution will establish a colony on Azuria's southern continent. We will explore this integration of logic and emotion in a controlled environment, documenting our findings for all Luminarans to evaluate. And if this evolution proves destructive, if it leads to the very chaos our ancestors sought to eliminate, then we will have learned a valuable lesson, Alara said. But I believe we will demonstrate something else entirely, that Luminarans can be both logical and emotional, both efficient and expressive, that we can be whole in a way we haven't been for 10 millennia. The council chambers fell silent as the High Chancellor considered her words. James noticed something subtle, almost imperceptible changes in Serenor's light pattern, tiny fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible in a being of perfect logical control. Show me more, Serenor said, finally gesturing to the display of Azuria's oceans. Explain how these organisms communicate through emotion. For the next 2 hours, Alara presented their findings. The research from the crisis, the successful emotional protocol, the remarkable evolution of the organism networks afterward. James added the medical perspective, detailing the physiological changes in Luminarans experiencing emotional awakening. Throughout the presentation, James noticed more council members showing those subtle light fluctuations. The seed of change was being planted even here among the most traditional of Luminarans. Finally, the High Chancellor spoke. Your proposal for a colony is not without merit. A controlled environment to study this phenomenon may provide valuable data. But a senior counselor interjected, we cannot risk this spreading uncontrolled throughout Luminaran society. The potential for disruption is too great. Disruption or growth, Alara challenged. Change is the essence of life, counselor, even logical life. The debate continued for another hour, growing increasingly technical as the council demanded specific plans for the colony's safeguards against emotional contamination of the broader population and regular evaluation protocols. Through it all, Alara remained poised, answering each concern with a blend of logical reasoning and emotional conviction that seemed to confound the traditional counselors. They had no framework for engaging with someone who operated in both realms simultaneously. At last, Serenor raised a hand for silence. The High Council will permit the establishment of this colony as proposed. Queen Alara will retain her title, but will delegate traditional governance to a logical proxy appointed by this council. The colony will be monitored closely for any sign of destructive outcomes. It was a victory if a qualified one. James could see the relief in Alara's light patterns, though her external composure never wavered. There is one additional matter, Serenor continued, the human Captain Morgan. James tensed. His presence was instrumental in triggering this change, and his continued involvement presents complications. Complications. Alara's light flickered briefly with concern. Interspecies relations of this nature are unprecedented, the Chancellor stated. The potential for further unforeseen consequences is significant. James understood what wasn't being said. They viewed him as the source of the contamination, the catalyst that had disrupted 10,000 years of Luminaran stability. Captain Morgan has been appointed as human liaison to the colony project, Ilara said firmly. His medical expertise is invaluable to understanding the physiological aspects of our evolution. Perhaps, Serenor allowed, but the High Council recommends limited contact between the captain and the Luminaran population for the integrity of the study. James felt anger rising but forced himself to remain calm. With respect, Chancellor, I believe isolation would compromise your results. If you truly want to understand this evolution, you need to observe it in its natural context, including interspecies interaction. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. James had used their own logical framework against them. A valid point, a younger counselor acknowledged. After a brief silent communication among the council members, evidenced only by subtle light patterns passing between them, Serenor spoke again. Captain Morgan may continue in his liaison role, but his interactions will be documented as part of the study. The colony project will proceed as planned. As they left the capital ship, James felt the tension drain from his shoulders. That was close. Indeed. Alara agreed, her light settling into patterns of relief and determination. But we've won the essential battle. The colony will proceed with full authority. They're still treating it as an experiment, not a legitimate social movement. For now, she said. But experiments have a way of becoming reality when the results are compelling enough. 6 months later, James stood on the balcony of the colony's central complex, watching the sunset over Azuria's southern continent. The ocean before him pulsed with intricate light patterns, the ever-evolving communication of the organism networks that had spread across the planet's surface. The colony had grown faster than anyone had predicted. What had begun as a settlement of a few thousand had swelled to over 2 million luminarans, with hundreds more arriving daily. The experiment had become a movement, then a society, then a cultural renaissance. Beautiful, isn't it? Alara joined him at the railing, her light resonating with the patterns in the ocean below. Beyond words, James agreed, taking her hand. In the 6 months since the colony's founding, he had watched her transformation continue. No longer just Queen Alara of the Luminarans, she had become something more. A leader who governed with both wisdom and compassion, logic and feeling. The High Council is sending another evaluation team next week, she said. They seem perpetually surprised that we haven't descended into emotional chaos. James smiled. What will they find this time? Progress they cannot ignore. Our medical research has produced treatments for conditions traditional Luminaran science deemed untreatable. Our artists have created works that are being studied throughout the Confederation. And the organism networks continue to evolve in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about consciousness. From the colony below came the sound of music. Not human music, but something uniquely Luminaran. Crystalline tones that resonated with light patterns, creating an experience that engaged multiple senses simultaneously. They're playing the new symphony, Alara noted, her light pulsing with pleasure. Harmony of the Spheres. Composed by Talus, right? James had watched the young researcher transform from a traditional scientist into one of the colony's most innovative artists. Yes, he calls it a tribute to the first emotional awakening. Her light shifted to a pattern James recognized as affectionate amusement. Apparently, it tells the story of a human who complimented an alien queen's legs. James laughed. History reduced to a single moment. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest recognitions. She turned to face him fully, her light patterns shifting to those deeper, more intimate wavelengths she reserved for him alone. You saw beauty where others saw only function, James. You recognized the being behind the form. I just said what I saw, he replied, reaching up to touch the side of her crystalline face. Everything else was already within you, waiting to emerge. Below them, the colony continued its evening activities. Luminarans moving through the streets in groups, their light patterns interacting in complex social communications that blended logic and emotion. Human visitors mingled among them, participating in this new society that bridged different forms of consciousness. The latest report from the Luminaran homeworld indicates increasing interest in our work here, Alara said. Even some of the traditionalists are beginning to acknowledge that emotional capacity may have evolutionary advantages. Revolution by demonstration, James observed. Show them a better way, and eventually they'll recognize it. It may take generations, she cautioned. I'm okay with that. Some changes are worth waiting for. As the last light of day faded, the bioluminescent organisms in the ocean intensified their displays, as if compensating for the setting sun. Their patterns had grown increasingly complex over the months, developing what the colony's scientists had begun to recognize as a form of artistic expression unique to their species. We're hosting the first interspecies art exhibition next month, Alara said, watching the ocean's display. Luminar and human and organism creations side by side. The High Council is sending an observer. Brave of them. Her light pulsed with humor. They're calling it a cultural research initiative. They still can't quite bring themselves to acknowledge that art has value beyond study. They will, James said with conviction. Eventually, beauty finds a way past even the strongest defenses. He would know. 6 months ago, he had been an aging combat medic, overlooked and undervalued, working out his remaining years in isolation. Now he stood beside a queen, helping to guide a social revolution that might ultimately transform an entire civilization. I've been offered a permanent position here, he said after a moment. Director of Interspecies Medical Research. I know, Ilara replied, her light pulsing warmly. I approve the appointment. Pulling rank, Your Majesty, using appropriate authority to secure necessary personnel. Her light shifted to patterns of affection and humor. With perhaps a small emotional bias, James smiled. I accepted. I know that too. As darkness fell completely, the lights of the colony created their own constellation on the surface of Azuria, a testament to what was possible when different forms of consciousness learned to recognize the value in each other. Alara's hand tightened around his, her light synchronizing with his heartbeat as it always did when they were close. We have created something remarkable here, James Morgan. We've only just begun, he replied. Above them, stars appeared in the night sky, distant worlds with their own possibilities. Before them stretched an ocean alive with light and expression, and between them flowed the most improbable connection in the galaxy, a bridge between species, between ways of being, between heart and mind. A connection that had started with 7 simple words, your legs, they move like poetry, and had become a revolution of light.